All right, we're good. What's going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa. And of course, as always, I am your humble host, Niko House. Today, I am here with Danny, who is not speaking on behalf of the Joshua for Congress campaign, so I want to be clear about that. However, she is a political director for Josh's campaign. For those of you who remember, I interviewed Josh and does some absolutely fantastic work. And Danny has assured me, and I've checked her out. Of course, she is a progressive. She knows her stuff. And even though we have some disagreements, we want to try and settle those disagreements here peacefully, with some civility. Not that fake neoliberal bullshit civility, but like actual civil discourse. And see if we can try to find some common ground here. So, Danny, first, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks, Niko. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I can't complain. And before we get into the nitty gritty, how is Josh's campaign doing? I see he's been getting a lot of traction lately.
Yeah, we're frankly we're doing really well, and we're all really excited about it. We've been raising really great money online, which I would say way out of the norm for your average campaign. We're creeping up on the 70,000 mark.
Wow.
So thanks to all of our amazing donors, first and foremost. Most of that just is Twitter engagement and other social media. So and we've gotten the endorsements of the local Our Revolution group, some DSAs. The Olympia DSA goes out and knocks doors for our campaign, even though we're not allowed to coordinate exactly with them. But they host canvases.
Kind of like the Working Family Parties does for some.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a lot of energy right now. We're starting to ramp up to launch a really ambitious phone banking program. So y'all should stay tuned for this. And I believe Josh is currently calling for the abolition of the CIA in the wake of the coup in Bolivia. And so we're pushing an incredibly strong anti-imperialist foreign policy message.
It's good stuff. We need more of that in Congress. We need more of that in Congress for sure. Well, one, I'm sure that Josh will do incredibly well. I feel like the city council race in Seattle was really good news for progressives everywhere, but especially for Josh in Washington. He was boasting, which is very rare because really I've never heard anybody else be able to boast about the electoral process in Washington and how strict it is and how much accountability there is. And I've always said you can put your best neoliberal, your best neocon up against the best progressive in a straight up race where election integrity where there's a stronghold of election integrity in the region, and the progressives going to win every time, even clearly if you put $1 million behind a neoliberal. So that's good stuff. So I want to go over what the tweet that you said the other day so that we have context for the audience and they know what we're talking about. So obviously everybody knows here I've endorsed Tulsi. Danny is a Bernie supporter, but she does not like Tulsi as a politician. It was brought to my attention just by some of my fans that Danny had tweeted this out, and they thought it was in reference to me. But Danny said, just to clarify, that it wasn't specifically for me, but it was for several people. So Danny said that Tulsi Gabbard is a phony. She doesn't care about democracy or ending wars. She's a fascist Islamaphobe, and you can tell by everything she says and does. Disagree. I'll come on your show and split your rig. You don't have to explain that one to me. I don't know what that means. I know what split your wig means, but is split your rig something different I don't know about?
It's something that is a lot harder to master for, if we're being honest.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. Understood. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So, okay. So that's generally what she said, and so I wanted to give you an opportunity to just explain what do you mean by she's a fascist Islamophobe. What is your justification for saying that?
Okay, and I would love to explain this position because, to start off, these words have meanings. First off, when we talk about fascist, because Islamophobe, everybody pretty much knows what you mean by Islamophobe.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Fascism is a specific ideology with a specific playbook. So fascists the world over utilize specific things in order to perpetuate their ideology. Concepts like the mythic past, they allude to when something was great, we need to make it great again. That's something that y'all can recognize. Propaganda, anti-intellectualism, an unreality, a universe that they construct with that propaganda. They play to sexual anxiety or anxiety about deviance from sexual norms, and they utilize victimhood in order to justify the expansion of law and order as concepts. Yeah. So when I talk about fascist ideology going forward here, that's what I'm referring to.
So my question would be though, so just to clarify, but the definition, even academically, just there has to be an authoritarian nature right?
Correct.
And they have to be clearly right-wing and authoritarian. So we agree on that part too, though, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yes,
just wanted to
we do.
make sure. Okay, so
And,
go ahead.
Yeah, unequivocally. And the points that I want to make about Tulsi Gabbard's record and her actions that have led me to believe these things about her are rooted in a set of events that have actually been discussed on your show before when you had Kyle Kalinske on. You talked about how there was an organization, as multiple organizations as well as individuals who had been donors during the 2013-2014 timeframe that had sort of been misappropriated as these groups who wanted her to support right-wing Hindutva ideology in India. And you said on your show that she didn't deliver them anything when you were talking to Kyle.
Well, one, I said, so to clarify, I said so the article that originally wrote that, they actually had to write an apology at the bottom of it because they were only basing it off of last names. They actually didn't speak. At first they said organizations, then they had to retract that, but then they said individuals, and it was literally based off of their last names. And then I said she didn't give them anything in return. You're correct about that.
Yes. So there were some problems with the Intercept article that linked it directly to some individuals, and they did have to clarify that at the bottom. But the group that people discuss most frequently when they refer to Tulsi's donor base with regard to these things is a group called, I want to get it right, Sangh Parivar, which Sangh is linguistically equivalent, in vernacular to the RSS, which is sort of the union, the organization. And Parivar means family. So these are like family of the RSS. These are associated groups, and it's built into the name. So the Sangh Parivar donation groups, again, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about political entities that specifically uphold Hindutva right-wing ideology in India, donated to Tulsi Gabbard en masse to the tune of, I believe, sorry, I'm just grabbing a number because I don't want to get it wrong for y'all. $1.24 million over the 2013-2014 cycle.
Yeah, that sounds roughly correct.
Yeah, so referring to this timeline, it kind of gets muddy. A lot of people bring up different things, but in 2013 is when this sort of chain of events started that everybody keeps talking about, and that I want to make sure we talk about facts. Tulsi was the only member of the House's Democratic delegation to oppose HR 417, which was a specific resolution to intervene on behalf of persecuted Muslims and disassociate from the right-wing Hindutva movement in India.
Now, I want to clarify, if we're talking, if you can let me, I want to make sure we're talking about the same resolution. This is the same resolution that was introduced by who, if you don't mind me asking?
I did not write the initial person's name.
I'm pretty sure it was a Republican.
Right here in my notes, but it was HR 417 in 2013.
Yeah, that was introduced by a Republican.
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
And
okay. I just want to make sure, but go ahead.
Yes, correct. It was introduced by a Republican. She argued against the bill and was the only member of Congress to do so. Now, this is not inherently wrong to argue against and be like, look, we shouldn't be playing with religion in other people's countries. And that's not where I have a problem with Tulsi. My problem is that after the right wing in India saw that, specifically the Sangh organization saw that, they began donating to Tulsi en masse and lobbying her. In 2014,
so hold on, I want to address that part first. I want to address that whole thing first. So yes, I would it's probably a more sound argument that she was the first Hindu in Congress in history, and probably most of those donations came from that. But even if I do, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say that people didn't make any consideration for your statement, because that's probably true too, right? Both things can be true. Now, here's my issue with that legislation. I've actually read through that legislation pretty thoroughly and examined the situations that was happening in 2013 between the United States and Modi, specifically that Modi, for those who don't know, was would be the governor, if you will, of Gujarat. So what was taking place in Gujarat at the time, which is why if all of a sudden a Republican cares about they care about persecuting Muslims. The reason that they passed this legislation or they introduced it was because there were evangelicals there using their money to not only convert Hindus, but Muslims as well. And they were specifically targeting the Muslims because they were the most vulnerable. Now, during this time, what people don't talk about is that liberals love Modi, partially because of him standing up to the evangelicals in the region and on behalf of the Obama administration, all that good stuff. So what happened was, Modi understands the same thing that you understand and I understand. What is the first step to U.S. imperialism and Western colonialism? You convert. You shred beliefs. And what have evangelicals been known to do in any society, but especially in societies with people of color? They use their money and their religion to influence them. What Modi did was pass laws saying, or signed into law, I should say, saying that you cannot use an exorbitant amount of money to try and influence people, basically pay for them to be part of your religion, which is what the evangelicals were doing at the time. So that's why Tulsi spoke out against it. Go ahead.
This is the non-minister religious bill. Actually, I think there was a separate bill that you're talking about right now that she worked in 2014 as well to get rid of that. And which, makes sense. It holds with consistent with other things that Tulsi has said publicly. My getting back to sort of what I wanted to present here, though, is that in June 2014, after the Modi administration won the election, Tulsi Gabbard was invited to speak at a fundraiser. You've probably heard about this before too, where she went on stage with Vijay Jolie and sort of might not have known exactly what she was saying or who she was endorsing in the whole global context, but that's the most charitable interpretation I can think, is that Tulsi didn't know that she was on a stage with a bunch of extremely hard right politicians.
And where was this at?
It was a fundraiser. It was the Overseas Friends of the BJP that invited Gabbard, and Vijay Jolie was on stage. I would have to find a story about it. But that's not,
I understand what you're saying. Okay, go ahead. I know what you're talking about.
So
you talking about in New York?
Sorry?
In New York?
It might have been, I believe it. She has also gone to India as well and campaigned with the BJP. But this is in 2014 era. Now, the point I want to make about this is that after she was welcomed at this meeting and she talked about, how one by one we have made this change and that this Modi BJP government is going to lift up the people of India and et cetera. Like, she seemed to be buying in. And I understand if it was really a misunderstanding on her part, because we have some serious historical data that suggests that these people are very dangerous, and that they have been passing policy that is extremely dangerous, especially for atheists and other leftists in India right now. And the problem with Gabbard is what she did in the next year in Congress. So in Congress, here's some bills she sponsored. These are only bills she sponsored or co-sponsored, not just things she voted yes or no for, because I know there's a lot of nuance in bills, and sometimes you'll vote yes on a poison pill. These are things she signed her name to. HR 607 was recognizing the importance of the historic Indian elections. Now, this is my primary piece of evidence. She was delivering pork because it was not historic for any reason other than the fact that the BJP came into power.
Hold on, for Modi's election?
Yes, Modi's election.
Well, I think it was historic because he ended up having an 83% approval rating.
He had extremely high approval, but it's very common for people to have high approval in India because there is extremely high turnout, and they're an actually more politically engaged base of voters than we are. Even though they're a bigger country.
They are, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But it's also, I would imagine, it probably has something to do with the fact that, so Modi, for all of his faults that he absolutely has, because, well, he's a world leader and they all do. He was their version of their first populist candidate. Like he was their version of that. So for me, what I like to compare it to is the BJP has issues, and I've read about them, and RSS, same thing, and all that good stuff. However, assigning every negative assertion about BJP to Modi would be like me assigning every negative assertion of the Democratic Party to Bernie or Tulsi, and I don't do that. I try to judge on individual merits, and I critique where their critique needs to be, of course, and then I give credit where credit is due. So I just want to be, I just don't like the conflation, because as a Bernie supporter, as a Tulsi supporter, I've seen Republicans pull that card. Well, they're Democrats, so I'm not going to vote for them, even though Trump is shit.
So the point I was trying to raise with this is that is the clearest example I can find, like the most just straightforward, that she had a large donor base who was associated with this political entity, and she seems to have delivered for them in that way. And so to critique her for having that fundraising base, that's the case for it. That's kind of neither here nor there.
Okay.
What really concerns me is the rest of that voting record in 2014. Now, personally, I want to speak to my own personal experience too, because I'm on the program. I'm a trans woman. And in 2014, Tulsi Gabbard co-sponsored the Respect for Marriage Act. It wasn't the Defense of Marriage Act. It wasn't DOMA, but it was not acceptable.
Can you detail that so people know, so everybody knows what it is?
Yes, it's HR 2523, the Respect for Marriage Act, which, frankly, it was some equivocation about civil union versus marriage and leaving the decision to the states, which would have had a material impact of southern states with an evangelical majority in the voting base, making it illegal for gay people to get married. And I
so your issue is that it was too hands off, and there needed to be a more clear stance in favor of equity.
It was time to pick a side. It was 2014.
Yeah.
And I'm disappointed by that, personally, as an impacted person. Border security, HR 15 in 2014, she co-sponsored a massive expansion of border security, the expansion of CBP, and declared a mission for Border Patrol. Their specific mission was to gain operational control of the southwest border. That's just Mexico. That's not an immigration control to prevent any like terrorist activity. The people who committed 9/11 came.
Well, so in her defense, there was a lot of gang activity happening. So I don't really, I'm not. So for immigration, I'm like weird, and it's everybody has, some people are completely for open borders, and that's fine. But I'm like, I acknowledge the military-industrial complex and our influence in these various regions, not only in Central and South America, but overseas. And what happens is we end up propping up bad actors. And then the only time that we actually engage in, the refugee practices where we actually bring in refugees are only the people who are on the side of the authoritarian regime that we propped up. And so they end up, so you have like a lot of destabilization there. And this is just a consistent pattern on Tulsi, or with Tulsi, excuse me, where if she acknowledges the military-industrial complex in a particular region, or the intelligence community having too much influence via drug lords, and because that's what we do, we prop up these different cartels and shit like that, then you can't say we don't need security if we know that we're propping up bad actors and destabilizing regions with bad actors. So that's kind of like an and for me, but I get what you're saying.
With the assignment of responsibility that we do destabilize regions and hold up bad actors. A great example of this, where Tulsi is right, is Syria. She's actually more correct than everybody on Syria. The YPG Peshmerga fighters were the only people we should have been messing with. And back in 2014, Tulsi Gabbard was right on Syria.
Yes,
and she remains correct on Syria to this day.
Okay.
But in 2014, we didn't need an increase in Border Patrol. We had a massive amount of Border Patrol already. We ramped that up post 9/11. And I do want to get on to my next points, though, because there's actually a lot more. So
I got to ask, though, out of the points that you've made, now you assigned some pretty strong language. You call her a fascist and an Islamaphobe. Like, there's I get why those could be problematic votes. So don't get me wrong there, because I've never once claimed that Tulsi is perfect. But to call her a fascist would mean that she's a right-wing authoritarian, essentially. But that's nothing about her votes that you've detailed thus far screams out right-wing authoritarian, as much as it says, I have a disagreement about that, or I have a disagreement about who you supported here. However, like, that would be like me calling, once again, Bernie endorse Hillary. And I'm a Bernie supporter. I would never call Bernie a fascist for endorsing Hillary, no matter how much I disagree with it, because he personally is not even close. However, Hillary, I think both of us would agree, was a right-wing fascist.
Yeah. And so, I would say, and in 2016, you could probably dig through my Facebook and find me saying that Bernie had just endorsed a fascist. So
yeah. But so I feel like that we have to be careful, because you're making legitimate points, but I just feel like we have to be careful about the language we use when we're describing somebody that we disagree with. Because as imperfect as Tulsi is, Bernie's just as imperfect. And when it comes to foreign policy, specifically Islamophobia, Bernie just said in 2017 that he doesn't believe that Palestinians should have equal rights because that would mean the end of Israel. That's what he said. And I can
like that quote in context.
I will. So I'll read it for you. I actually have it here. Only because I just had a debate, so I just have a list of all the stuff. So it says, it's during the Al Jazeera interview where he was actually called out for also signing a letter that told the United Nations, which everybody in the Senate signed, by the way, so it wasn't like he was unique there, but it told everybody in the United Nations, you don't get to establish any committee that is pro BDS, period, or we're going to have some problems here. And of course, they eventually didn't do it because the United States, we already know, really runs the United Nations. So it was in that interview. And it said, if a two-state solution fails, Takruri asked Sanders, would he support a one-state solution with equal rights for both Israelis and Palestinians alike and equal citizenship. No, I don't, he said. I mean, I think if that happens, then it would be the end of Israel, and I support Israel's right to exist. Now, don't get me wrong. Now,
That's
Bernie is better on Israel and Palestine than basically every other Democrat. I think him and Tulsi are pretty close neck and neck there. And I believe, obviously, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are probably better than both of them in that regard. But there has never been one statement that you can point or say where Tulsi has said very clearly, this group of people does not deserve equal rights because I think this group of people deserves to exist. And by the standard that you're setting for Tulsi, that would mean I would be justified in calling Bernie an Islamaphobe. And that's not fair to Bernie because he's not an Islamaphobe, even though he gets things wrong based off of his biases. You get what I'm saying? That's why I feel like we have to be careful about the rhetoric we use. But go ahead.
I do need to go down the rest of the list because it's going to frame my argument more clearly. And
okay, go ahead.
In 2014, again, HR 938 was the U.S.-Israel Strategic Partnership Act. Mm-hmm. And just some quick points, it essentially sent Israel piles of U.S. surplus weapons when they were ramping up settlement, when Netanyahu had just consolidated his gains. Oh,
you're not going to get any argument with me? Her and Bernie are just not far enough left from me on that. So you're not, any Israel vote, I'm right there with you.
Well, and here's why, though, I'm willing to go the step further and say Islamaphobe.
Okay.
And I know how serious that charge is that not only did she support that, she also co-sponsored, again, these are sponsored or co-sponsored bills, HR 657, which expressed the sense of the House of Representatives regarding U.S. support for the state of Israel as it defended itself against unprovoked rocket attacks from Hamas militants.
Yes.
And this was pretty strong language that was firmly targeted against Palestinians. At the
same
time,
that was my main critique of both Bernie and Tulsi on Israel and Palestine. He signed the Senate version of it.
Just not right. And in that same year, also co-sponsored HR 4229, which was Venezuelan Liberty and Democracy Solidarity Act. It was the first big sanctions package. It led to the coup attempt in 2019.
The coup attempt where?
In Venezuela.
Okay.
When they attempted to install Juan Guaido, that was the result of years of crippling sanctions, which we levied in 2014 as a result of HR 4229, which Tulsi Gabbard sponsored.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she also co-sponsored the USA Freedom Act. I hear a lot of people saying that she's the only one that comes out in favor of whistleblowers. HR 30.
Hold on, what year was this?
This was 2014, right after Snowden.
No, okay, I got you. I'm with you.
The U.S. security state. And in addition to that, in the same year when we were trying to have nuclear peace talks with Iran and North Korea, she put up HR 1771, which is the North Korea sanctions enforcement. They were willing to take nukes off the table, and those sanctions brought them away from the table. We could have had nuclear peace in the region, and that was blown.
I agree.
Legislation that was targeted at an authoritarian government that we have no business intervening in, if you are to take Tulsi's worldview that she puts out to the news. Let's talk about today, though, right? Let's talk about today. This is all 2014. These are actions that have consequences that I want to hold her accountable for. And again, undermining the Iran deal at the same time was extremely dangerous. Now, I believe she co-sponsored and voted for the Nuclear Iran Prevention Act of 2013. So this was a little before the 2014 bills. So these are all things that were structural actions that I'm citing.
Mm-hmm.
Not just my opinion about Tulsi. Right now, when she's being asked about things like Venezuela or Bolivia or Kashmir, I'm also not satisfied with her answers. Bernie called Bolivia a coup. She said she's waiting for the facts.
Well,
that is an issue upon
that's true. That's true. She is. But do you know why she's waiting for the facts?
Because she is willing to go on record?
Well, no, it's not because of going on record. So there's a difference between Bernie and Tulsi. First of all, Bernie calling it a coup, although I'll give him credit because it's important to show solidarity, but that's a leftist solidarity, which is cool. I'm a leftist, so I like that. However, he's running for president, right? And so is Tulsi. The difference is Bernie's not going to get asked shit about this when he gets in front of the camera. Tulsi is the foreign policy candidate, and as much as people don't like to admit it, her answers on foreign policy have been by far and away the best that I've heard from any president outside of Mike Gravel, of course, or maybe Jill Stein. Our presidential candidate, excuse me. So when Tulsi answers, we have to understand that it is not going to be good things are good and bad things are bad. It's not what's going to happen. It's going to be, if I can specifically implicate, she's going to say, if I can specifically implicate the United States in this coup, which is what's being argued right now by the left, of course, and we're right because we know. However, I know for a fact because I communicate with the campaign, and my team was actually literally with her covering the campaign in California. Then the day before that, my other team member, Sophia, was covering her in New Hampshire. She was in the middle of all this happening. She was in New Hampshire giving speeches on a plane for 6 or 7 hours, interviews, holding a Veterans Day event that she was invited to, holding her own Veterans Day event. The next day, she was back on the plane. So literally up until maybe last night when I think she probably finally landed back on the East Coast, she hasn't had time to do the in-depth research on this situation, whereas it was obvious in Venezuela that it was clearly the United States intervening. In Bolivia, there's been a muddying of the waters where you need to, if you know what Tulsi deals with on a daily basis from the mainstream, because she's going to be interviewed about it when she speaks about it. She's going to be chastised. Well, how do you know the United States was involved? How do you know it? Or what about the Supreme Court being stacked in his face? You know, all the bullshit that the right has been trying to push.
I'll give you that one. I'll just give you that one. I'm like, okay, I would love to see the forthcoming statement from the Gabbard campaign on that. And frankly, I'd be happy to eat crow if she comes out harder left than Bernie did.
But she always comes out harder left on foreign policy than Bernie does.
I would disagree with that.
And what example can you give that Bernie is come out harder left other than Lula? But that was like really late. It already happened. And he didn't demonstrate once again that he understood why Lula was being in prison or our involvement. See, that's my concern. So as Bernie the senator is making these statements, they're great. AOC statements fine, Elon statements fine, but Elon and AOC aren't running for commander in chief where 70% of your job is foreign policy, and you have a direct influence on the outcome of these situations. Bernie buys into the intelligence narratives way too often for my comfort. So when we're talking about, for example, Assad, what does Bernie say about Assad? He pushes the same narrative that has already been debunked by the OPCW leaks.
I'm happy to just let you have that one.
And then Maduro, because you can get Lula right, and you got the Bolivia situation right, because it is a coup, and it's freaking obvious it was a coup. Yeah. But then you get Maduro wrong. And Lula likes Maduro, and Morales likes Maduro, and they're all in allyship. So once again, it has to, for me, and by the way, I'm a Tulsi supporter who definitely is pushing Tulsi to make her statement and making sure she gets it right. But nonetheless, I would rather her be last to the party and be the only one to get it right and demonstrate that as a presidential candidate, knowing what she could do to change that situation or prevent another Morales from happening in the future, than just say good things are good, bad things are bad, and appease the left. Because that's what Bernie did. He didn't demonstrate that he understands how this took place. He just showed leftist solidarity, which is great for a leftist, it's great for progressives, but it is not necessarily demonstrative of a presidential candidate that understands why this happens. Because you can't say, once again, Lula great, Morales has a coup, but Maduro, that's the bad socialism. We need that Canadian, that Scandinavian socialism. You get what I'm saying? So
I absolutely hear you. And here's the central point that I want to make about Tulsi's particular brand of branding when it comes to foreign policy. It is about the framing, and you're talking about nuance right now. Okay. You're talking about how you have to demonstrate not only do you understand what the facts on the ground are, but the connotations of actions that you're going to take.
Absolutely.
And so, in positioning herself strongly against Iran and against the people she has chosen to oppose, while being a non-interventionist with everybody else.
That was also 2014.
On Israel, on right-wing fascism in India, on not just those two places, but also Iran, as well as other national security interests.
So I would agree with you that her position on Iran was problematic, but it had nothing to do with Iran being a Muslim dominated. Because at this point, and even before that, Iran is becoming more and more secularized again. It was legitimately that this fear that the majority of the liberal quote unquote left believe that Iran was a direct threat to Israel. Now, at this point, Tulsi also believed Israel could do no wrong at that point. However, after 2015, 2016, like many leftists, we figured out, oh, wow, all that shit is bullshit. They're all lies. And there's been nobody to call out Netanyahu more substantively than Tulsi has. What was Bernie's statement on Golan Heights when we pimped it out? There isn't one. I can answer it for you because I just debated and I know it. So Tulsi called out immediately, and then was the only person in the entire race to call out Benjamin Netanyahu working with Saudi Arabia, which directly contradicts his whole idea that, oh, Israel can't work with Arab countries because we feel like it's a threat. And yet he's working with Saudi Arabia to push Trump's agenda. And obviously Trump works with Saudi Arabia to push Israel's agenda. And then he works with Israel to push Saudi Arabia's agenda. And she was the only one that was beginning to connect these dots and ultimately, of course, conclude that it was about money and oil as usual and maintaining power for these individual superpowers. So from 2014, if we want to use arguments that things that Tulsi voted for 2014 were bad, which I 100% agree with, and guess what? She would agree with you too. That's the difference. But by your logic, I would then be forced, by your logic, if I'm adhering to this, to call Bernie an Islamaphobe. Because based off of your logic, once again, in 2011, Bernie voted for a resolution that Hillary Clinton eventually used to overthrow Gaddafi, which led to slavery in Libya. She had to remind him of this during the debates because he forgot he co-sponsored it and introduced it with him. So in the debates in 2016, he tried to call out Hillary for it and forgot that he co-sponsored legislation that led to it. That was him. That's not Tulsi.
That's how I
now,
feel
here's the difference. But here's the difference. Tulsi understands and can explain in detail why she got it wrong, how she was misled, and how she ended up evolving on a particular issue. Just like now, before she was sanction crazy. Her and Bernie both. Now she is completely against sanctions. She's even against BDS because she's against Russian sanctions, Iranian sanctions, and she's against BDS. And I was kind of confused. I'm like, oh, whoa. Why are you against BDS? She said, no. I will fight for your right. And she signed legislation to make sure that you can participate in BDS and I can participate in BDS because she's an absolutist when it comes to the First Amendment. However, she's against sanctions because she knows that at the end of the day, guess who's going to be punished by BDS? Not only the Israeli people who don't give a shit about what's going on as far as our geopolitical conversations, they're just trying to live their lives, but the Palestinians, they're retaliated against. And Kim Iverson, I really encourage you to go watch her video, by the way, is an amazing video that exposes Israel's, just how bad that situation is.
Oh, I'm painfully aware.
Yeah, but they said the Palestinians told her that the BDS movement is, even though it's really well intentioned, it's causing retaliation against the Palestinians, and that's what Tulsi doesn't want. So she's
like victim blaming to me. That feels like victim blaming.
No, she's no. The Palestinians told her this because she is still. I don't care. She doesn't mind if you participated one way or the other. Neither do I. Like, I don't really have a stance strongly one way or the other. I'm more concerned about the human rights atrocities and dealing with it directly and holding people accountable. But back to Tulsi specifically, her evolution is evident in, if you listen to her town hall, if you listen to her speeches, if you listen to the interview that I did with her. She's the first candidate. Obviously, a lot of people have been part of Council on Foreign Relations. Tulsi was a term member. She's no longer part of it because her term has expired. However, she's the only person that has been open and willing to discuss exactly how she was brought into CFR, what the process was, why they brought her in, how most of the other members don't like her anymore because they thought she was one thing. Same thing with the Democrats. They thought she was one thing. And then when she saw through the mirage that a lot of people had to see through 2015, 2016, she completely flipped the switch. And that was it. When it comes to Russiagate, what the rhetoric that Bernie is parroting in, let's be honest, it's a little bigoted. It's a little bit bigoted when everything wrong with the world is Russia's fault. Tulsi, she might have a problem with Russia, she might not, but her first statement is always, okay, first of all, we can't do this. We can't, especially if we want to not have a Cold War, because that would be great, and not have a nuclear holocaust, which would also be great. Would really fuck up my day if I was dead. We have to use diplomatic methods to quell these tensions. And so
I'd love to respond to that, actually.
Go ahead.
If you see Bernie Sanders' statement on that, it is equivocating. Frankly, it is infuriating. But I don't think he does participate in everything's Russia bad. He typically says things like, we know that Russia made attempts of intellectual attacks against our election, which,
we know that Russia. What does that mean, though? Because that's what it leads. It's like saying we know that Muslims bombed bombed us or attacked us on 9/11. We know that Muslims did it. Hell no, I would never allow. No, we can't say that because that's how the right.
He could say that Putin did that and be a little more clear about it. But most of the time, feeding into the Russia narrative is totally negative. I don't think Bernie's been sucked into it. I think he has said what he needs to say to cover his bases on not being incorrect, in making sure he says out loud, like, yes, there were attempts that did occur. We need to investigate whatever happened there. And then that's about all the credence the man gives it. And like, let's
that's still, but so that's political though, which is a different discussion, of course. But but that's against the consistency that and mind you, I knew about some of Bernie's shortcomings on foreign policy in his rhetoric in the past, but only because of somebody on the network that I actually get a closer look. Like his rhetoric, he won't even say Palestine. Like so, and once again, I don't think Bernie's Islamophobic. I mean. He has Islam. He has Muslims in his campaign. Muslims endorsed him. Clearly, he is great, especially when it comes to protecting their civil rights and their human rights, right? However, in situations specifically, because that's what the allegation is, her religious background essentially is tied to this Islamophobic pattern that you have seen throughout her career in U.S. Congress. But then by the same token, I could say Bernie's Jewish background disables him from saying the word Palestine. It allows him to say, oh my God, if there's a one-state solution where everyone has equal rights, Muslims, because that's what he's saying, Muslims are gonna wipe out the Jews. And that is Islamophobic. Once again, is it true? Is he?
So you agree though that framing is Islamophobic?
That framing of what?
Of the issue. If you were to, if someone, not you, of course, if someone were to take that position, you agree that is Islamophobic, correct?
To take the position on Palestine? Absolutely.
Take that position and say that the Muslims will wipe out the Jewish people in
absolutely,
Israel,
absolutely.
Palestine. That would be Islamophobic to say that, correct?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the point I'm making, is that when we use these words, it is not always inflammatory to do so. Sometimes it is to describe something specific, and in my case, I was discussing a pattern of votes that give me real pause when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard as a foreign policy candidate.
Okay.
Because she has historically sided in structural ways against either left, ostensibly leftist-led countries, and more frequently Muslim nations. Now, this is not, we've had the conversation about her record on torture and that indefensible stance.
Well, no, her record on torture is one thing. Her statement on torture, people debated, and she said she didn't get the.
She votes to end enhanced interrogation, and so again, this is not something.
No, where her vote for because in her record, human rights gave her 100% on torture.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, go ahead.
She made a statement publicly that was indefensible.
No, she just said, I'm against torture, but if the world was on the line, I would do whatever I could to defend my country. That's all she said.
That is a right-wing talking point.
That's not really a right. Okay, so that statement makes sense once again only if she has 100% voting record on pro-torture things and didn't defend the whistleblowers who exposed torture. You get what I'm saying?
You won't see me come on here and say Tulsi Gabbard has structurally led to the use of torture. I won't say that because she doesn't vote for it.
But so here's my thing, and I just want to just to help to see so you can see things through my lens, because I'm both a Bernie and a Tulsi supporter, although I endorse Tulsi for various reasons, but I still support Bernie. Because I don't like when people take things out of context with Bernie, nor do I like him, obviously, when it happens to Tulsi. So you're a Bernie supporter, right? I'm assuming.
Yeah. I will be
You'll be voting for him in the election. Okay. So why is it that you feel like you have to use these inflammatory descriptions of Tulsi's past, but it seems, and I went through your tweets just to verify, that you don't even reconcile or reckon with Bernie's past, which is just as bad, if not worse, by your standards? That's my question, because I'm trying to understand why you feel like it's more important to address a candidate who's only polling at 3%, 6% in the highest poll than the person who's about to win the election, and his past is problematic, and he hasn't even reconciled it, nor has he apologized for it like Tulsi has.
I'd love to answer that. My answer to that question, the reason that I hold Tulsi accountable with these very specific terms is because her framing, not just the answer or even the vote, but the nuance, the things that surround it, and Bernie's nuance, his framing are fundamentally different. When Bernie goes on to Fox News or Breitbart or whatever, he would never go to Breitbart, but it would be political suicide. I'm not saying she shouldn't go there.
Yeah,
I'm saying he operates within the framing she is presented by right wingers, and that's why she says things like we need to make sure the border's secure. We don't, nobody's saying open borders.
But Bernie said the same thing.
He has to engage.
But Bernie said the same. Somebody on the left tried to call him out saying, why won't you support open borders? A leftist called him out, and he took heat from obviously the farther left. But he said, oh, no, I don't know. I believe in secure borders. He said that. That was Bernie who said that. Bernie and Tulsi hold the exact same position on borders. They do. I know it's hard for people to believe because they've accepted this framing of Tulsi that she's somehow like right wing on her immigration policy.
Bernie said that publicly.
Huh?
You can look it up. I lambasted him.
Oh well, but once again, and by the way, I'm glad that you're consistent there. But that once again speaks to my point. It seems like you're more, and it's not just you, I guess that's why I'm trying to understand the logic. It seems like you're more concerned with Tulsi's record as a person who, and it took her quicker to evolve on a lot of these issues than Bernie has. For obvious reasons, we're in an information age, obviously. But at the same time, it still took her less time to evolve. She got it right. And she's the only one who comes out and will say something to the yo, I was lied to. That's why I joined the military and went to Iraq. I was literally lied to. And she's the only one who'll say that. And she's a veteran. And she's saying this. She's the only one whenever the 9/11 victims called all the campaigns, including Bernie's, they all ignored them. Tulsi answered the phone and demanded, and they propped her up and celebrated her for it and demanded that there is transparency so that we can punish the people involved, which is obviously more than likely Saudi Arabian officials. When we critique Bernie, I try my best to critique him where he needs to be critiqued and celebrate him where he needs to be celebrated. And I try to do the same with Tulsi. In fact, in the beginning of this election, I actually went through and said, look, these are all the problems with Bernie that Tulsi she's going to need to address for me to take her seriously as a progressive. And she did address all of them. If we're going to have these genuine conversations about how to move all of our candidates left, then I feel like the way we go about doing it and making sure that we're consistent and calling our allies out when they're wrong and how we do it, once again, is important. Could you agree with that? I would never just, hey man, how can you say something like that? He's a fascist. Look at what Bernie voted for in 2011. The fact that people don't know, his foreign policy advisor literally left the campaign because Bernie, even after all the facts were presented to him, still wanted to bomb Kosovo. He had a sit-in in Burlington. And they were like, yo, why are you doing this? And he was like, I made a hard decision. It is what it is. That's what he said. I mean, not it is what it is, but he said it was a hard decision and that was the end of it. And he still did it. Bernie has his shortcomings, but I'm not going to call him a fascist. Flawed? Absolutely. Tulsi? Flawed? Absolutely. But I think it's important because I just feel like there's this hyper focus where people have been throwing out these words to associate with Tulsi, like fascist, like Islamaphobe, tying them. It seems like either they're doing it consciously or unconsciously because these are the same things that I see progressives throw out about Trump. So they're trying to say that Tulsi is like Trump, essentially, without saying it. But I feel like it's not fair when we're considering the context of the other progressive in the race, which no one would ever call a fascist. No one would ever call an Islamophobe, yet the evidence is just as strong based off of your criteria. Do you feel like that we maybe could have a more productive conversation about where Tulsi needs to move left on, what she needs to address, if we're consistent in calling it out and making sure that we're critiquing our progressives as allies and trying to move left? Because we've seen that she moves left if you talk to her and give her clarification.
There are, to give you an answer to that question, like a full thought out answer here. I did, because you told me we would talk about this near the end, and I wanted to. It's extremely important. Yeah. There is a correct way to critique people. And I'm not going to die on the hill of trying to score any more points, but again, when I talk about Tulsi specifically and use those words, those very specific words, we talked early in the segment about the cultivation of unreality, the use of propaganda, and a few other things that, based on the full experience of following that campaign, I feel is the case. And I need some movement to otherwise, feel.
So what use of propaganda? Because once again, I got to be consistent here.
I understand.
Bernie's literally pushing a propagandist talking point with Russiagate, right? That's a propagandist talking point. If you want to make the argument, there's a possibility that Russia probably tried to interfere at some point because they're a superpower and literally every superpower in the world try to interfere in each other's elections. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that. But when you're trying to placate neoliberals by making this claim and then associate Trump with Putin and exacerbating this neo-McCarthyist Cold War rhetoric, that's propagandist rhetoric, and it is
upholding
it's authoritarian. It's authoritarian.
He's not generating that propaganda, and he's not arguing anything. That
I've been to a lot of his rallies, and I've watched a lot of his speeches, and I've heard him. I mean, I've seen it personally. I've heard it personally now, and it's a stark difference because Nina, which I've paid attention to, I'm friends with Nina also. She doesn't talk about it at all because she knows it's propagandist, and she does believe that Bernie is placating people who would otherwise try and trash him because of his democratic socialist ideology. And I get that. But at the end of the day, even if you're doing it to protect yourself, it doesn't mean that you're not trafficking in propaganda. Only calling out Republicans for voter suppression and pretending like Democrats don't do it is also propagandist. It's neoliberal propaganda to make us not focus on what's happening on our own team.
I feel the same way about things like border security arguments when there are concentration camps in this country right now.
There are concentration, of course, yeah.
Like equivocating on that is dangerous, no matter who does it, and they're all doing it right now. And I feel like it is part of a longer pattern for Tulsi than some of the other candidates, or a more consistent pattern.
There's no possible way that could be true because she's the youngest for one, but two, Bernie has a consistent record since he was in Congress. Huh?
If you're younger, each vote's a bigger percent of your record. And you have a shorter.
But you said longer though. That's why I'm once again. If we can go back, I'm trying not to like put Bernie on blast to have people like, oh my god, because Bernie is once again he's still a great candidate. But what I'm saying is, if we're going to use the argument, well, look at the record, look at this, look at that. I can make more. I guarantee it. I can make more arguments that everything that you're saying applies to Tulsi, or excuse me, Bernie, than it applies to Tulsi. And that's what I'm trying to understand. Why can't we just say, you know what? Both of them had their issues in the past. Does that mean we should judge them by the merits of what they do now? Because neither of us are running for president. These are the best options we have. We're hoping that one of them wins. Most Tulsi supporters are perfectly fine and I'll be running to the polls to vote for Bernie in the general election. I'll be canvassing just as hard as I would for Tulsi if he wins the Democratic primary. A lot of Bernie supporters, not all of them, they feel the same way. So if we're going to deal with what we have, because I would never judge you. Somebody could dig up old tweets from 8 years ago and say, this is who Danny is. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, it seems like she's changed since then. Shouldn't we judge her on now unless she shows us something different right now, consistently? Not a disagreement, but show a consistent pattern of fascism, if you will. Sure. I would never just assign your past and your history, especially after I feel like we're in this, what academics are going to call a new enlightenment period since 2015. It's not uncommon for people to have changed their views because of all of the revelations in 2015, from how corrupt the Democrats are to how fascist the Republican Party has become, because they have indeed become way more fascist than they've ever been.
We have a fascist government, actually.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Government fall into the right wing. All the states fall into the right wing.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Regulatory capture. So right now, industry works for industry, and the government also works for industry. So fascism is a word to describe what we have now.
100%.
That's why I'm so hesitant about people who capitulate to that ideology.
So what about the No More Presidential? Do you know what the No More Presidential Wars Act is?
Sorry? Do
you know what the No More Presidential Wars Act is?
I'm not familiar with the name of it.
It's Tulsi's legislation that she first introduced in 2017. Which was interesting because, as you probably figured out, no progressive has talked about it, which is why you probably don't know about it. It was to take power away from Trump to do unilateral military strikes and commit military troops to certain regions without going through congressional approval. And it originated when he just did the strike on Syria with no investigation. Nobody talked about it, although everybody was claiming how, we have to make sure that Trump doesn't But nobody talked about her legislation. Now, here's the thing about that. It would have subjected him, if it was passed in 2017, to impeachment if he would have conducted a military strike without congressional approval. That, once again, dilutes power from the office she's running for. Stop Arming Terrorists Act. where we worked with Saudi Arabia and keep funding them, and then we fund either directly or indirectly different terrorist organizations that would have held the president. Yemen, that was her and Ro Khanna who worked with Bernie to get those that legislation passed. Really, every step of the way, she's been diluting executive power on the military side of the president's job, and she's running for that office, knowing this. So, like, you're not going to, if she was a fascist, it would be concentrating power, but her legislation that she is introducing that the left, even the progressive left, isn't talking about, tells an entirely different story. You get what I'm saying? So that's why it's hard for me to buy into the fascism, because she's running for president, and the idea would be, hey, once you're in, you can do the opposite of Trump, and you can take care of all the issues. By, like, you can use Trump's power for the sake of good. But she does the opposite. She's like, Congress should be determining how we utilize this money that funds military or deploy our military. That's what the Constitution says. So she's diluting power rather than concentrating it, and she's running for that office. So that's why, like I said, I just think it's important that we try to say, what have you done for me lately? Because, like, for example, Cenk is about to run for president. I mean, for Katie Hill's seat in the House. Yeah. I don't like Cenk. I really do not like the man. I don't think he's a good actor. I think I have my issues with him. However, I'm still a pragmatist. Although I know he's going to piss me off sometimes. If legislation about Palestine and Israel comes through that could detrimentally hurt Palestine, I think he'll vote against it, because he, at the very bare minimum, considers himself a progressive, and he knows that would destroy his reputation. If anti-corruption legislation came through, I believe that Cenk would vote for that anti-corruption legislation. I'm still a pragmatist.
That's what you're talking about. This is critical support. That's what you're talking about, and that's kind of where I wanted to head when you asked the question about how do we move forward. So generating healthy critical support, that is something the left has to learn how to do. We have to learn how to do it. It's really important to not escalate commitment to a candidate because of who they are. Now, I have seen this with a number of candidates. I'm not going to peg out names because it'll end up detracting from the discussion. But whose supporters are extremely excited about them and unwilling to hear a word otherwise.
I've seen that a lot.
You know what I'm talking about. You've seen many candidates. So I would propose Eastern leftists developed half a century ago, which is something called unity, critique, unity, which means that we, as an organization, the group, the progressive left, we agree that when we begin a discussion, the overall goal is to come together, correct answer, the right thing. Critique happens in the middle. It is no holds barred. It is not bigotry. It is not hatred, but it is no holds barred critique. 100%. It is an honest, self-reflective look at the policy, at the downstream implications, at the accountability for previous voting record when we're selecting a leader, things like that. And then unity again. At the end, we all agree, before we begin to do this, that we're going to come together. We do that behind what is correct, behind what is right. And if we stick to that model, we are going to be coughing up better candidates every cycle.
I 100% agree. And that's the funny enough, that's actually how I go about basically what my show is. And not only when it comes to politicians, but different issues, because we may disagree on certain issues. Like, for example, Medicare for all is a highly combative issue, right? Everybody's one way or the other. Tulsi is like, she wants to maintain TRICARE and union insurance if they want to have it, but still introduce single payer, very similar to Australia. Some people, like, I have TRICARE. I just went to go get my medication last week. Everything was free. I love it. I don't have to wait in lines. It's all good. But some people, rightfully so, fear private insurance's influence in a single payer system, because some countries have been able to do away with it because they've introduced anti-corruption legislation simultaneously. However, other situations like Canada, it actually got worse the more private insurance got introduced. And so there's a legitimate debate to be had about that. However, I think that the problem is, like you were saying, there are a lot of people who assign the legislation to the candidate first and the candidate only, and that is their only argument against. I mean, I'm talking about literal facts. So
it must be bad.
Yeah. So, for example, when on the debate stage, there was this big thing that happened whenever they were like, well, Tulsi, do you agree with the federal jobs guarantee? She said, no, I mean, I support UBI. And obviously, Bernie supports federal jobs guarantee, but not UBI. And Yang supports UBI. People were mad at Tulsi for not supporting Bernie's policy. Tulsi supporters were mad at Bernie for not supporting UBI. Yang supporters were mad at Bernie for not supporting UBI. You know what I was mad at? Why the fuck can't we have both?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I was...
Both is the correct answer.
Yeah.
That's the funny part. Literally both is the correct answer.
Exactly. It's like, no, I think we need both.
But
we
we're
really
not focused on correct. We're focused on winning.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I do agree that is a root problem, that the escalation of commitment is a root problem. You know, buying into somebody, and when they've departed from what you expected initially, changing your own positions to fit where they are instead of, you know, telling other people that they have changed.
Yes.
That's a very dangerous thing to do. It's something that happens in fascist societies a lot too.
That's what I was about to say. The right keeps a stranglehold over their base by doing that, right? Yep. Even Trump, he did that. I'm the anti-war. I'm going to bring jobs back home. I'm going to do all this. And he was like, well, except for with Iran. And then all of a sudden, his supporters were like, well, Iran is trying to hurt us. They're dangerous to Israel. I was like, no. It's either you're anti-war or you're not. What do you mean? Exactly. You know, it's either you're anti-imperialist or you're not. So people equivocating on Bolivia. I've been just disgusted with the left. Because they're like, well, what about the stacked courts? That's not even, first of all, so those of us who do our research, just as an aside, for those of you who are wondering, Morales never had the power to stack the courts. The list is introduced by the Senate and then voted on by the House. And the House and the Senate, in order to do that, obviously have to keep winning over and over and over and over and over and over again to get who they want, which would mean the court is representative of the people. He doesn't have authoritative power to do that.
And even if the courts did the wrong thing or whatever, the constitutional procedure in Bolivia, for the audience here, is to remove the sitting president and use the leader of their parliament to replace him. That's the socialist from Morales' party. That's not who the interim president.
Exactly. How did the minority end up the interim president? It's just like Venezuela, which is, once again,
the CIA playbook.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is very, very, very outdated. It's like watching like a football team try and use players from the 1950s in 2019, and they're like, "Oh my God, they must be cheating. How could they tell we were going to do this?" Like, so. But I'm glad. Listen, I'm glad that we had this conversation, Danny. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the civility, and I hope that we reach, you know, an understanding, and that you have a better understanding of Tulsi, and I understand better where you're coming from. Because, like I said, your concerns. It's not that your concerns are illegitimate. These concerns, and it isn't just Tulsi, but by the way, so for Yang, just to have a candidate that neither of us have endorsed or backed, Yang, I have concerns with his foreign policy because, one, he has zero experience and he keeps getting it wrong over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Now, his domestic policy, to be fair, so some people will try and attack UBI, not because they don't like the policy, but because all of a sudden it's a libertarian policy because Yang's introducing it. That's not fair. Because UBI is a leftist policy, was first tried out in Scandinavian countries. And so
UBI was not developed in Scandinavian countries. It was first implemented there, but it was developed by the Chicago School of Economics by Milton.
No, I'm saying it was first implemented and tried out. Oh, okay. That's what I'm saying. So
UBI can be useful, and it is only useful in societies that have completely functional safety nets.
Exactly.
Also societies that have addressed the ownership paradigm of businesses.
Yes.
Because right now, if we pass a $1,000 UBI, your landlord is going to get that $1,000.
100%.
That's enough.
100%. Yeah, exactly. So that's my issues.
I'm worried with Yang about his immigration policy, if I'm honest, to sort of make them earn it.
Yeah, that's exactly. So that shit. Look, and Yang people got on me about it. I'm like, bro, no, you can't say that shit. They already earn it. Most of the motherfuckers work hard in Americans that were born here. Okay, so like, you can't say stuff like that, and it makes it.
Never work a day in their life. If they show up at our border, they deserve an open door and a warm bed. And that's a position you'll never see me move on. And
I will. So for me, for immigration, I'm about a clear path to citizenship. Like I don't, and so if we address the roots, which is the military-industrial complex, intelligence involvement, people really think that like if I'm from Honduras, I want to leave my home, my culture, the language I speak, my network. No, you just destroying my country, and I fear for my life every day. Like that's why. So for that, if you address that substantively, there's no reason why we can't afford a clear path to citizenship or even what you're talking about, because guess what? I'm not about to leave. I love my country. Why would I want to leave?
Lots of people do. Like, ain't nobody trying to come here. But let's also recognize the material facts on the ground. We're in 2019, right? We're at like 1 degrees C global climate rise.
Yes.
Now, temperature rise. Yeah. The first places that are going to be uninhabitable are going to be central and the northern part of South America and the Middle East and India.
Yes.
And there are going to be climate refugees coming to that border.
Well, yeah, we do have to welcome them with open arms. We do. I 100% agree with that. And I think that we should be working out treaties now to make sure that this is the case, so that there's no discussion. It can't be used politically against us when that time does arrive. Because at the end of the day, like, first of all, I think we need to be clear that it isn't just going to be these countries that are affected. I live in Miami, yo. So I am Central America, essentially. So we're going to have to address it. And so, so we have a lot we agree on, Danny.
Now, because it is happening now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's also true. 100%. And for people that don't know, if you think it's like, oh, it's only in America and it's only a cyclical thing, and yeah, climate change is cyclical, but we can still advance it. You look at the fires that are happening in Australia. PG&E, or is that what it's called out in California? They don't live in Australia. PG&E ain't in Australia. You can't blame them there.
People don't realize the African rainforest just burned in the Congo.
Oh, yeah, that's true, too. I read that.
A crazy amount of it burned. We heard about the Amazon, but we didn't hear about the Congolese rainforest. But
we can't normalize blackies, Danny, okay? We can't do that. That's like half of the country doesn't know that there's an African Union. When I tell people that, they're like, what? Yeah. Really? I'm like,
a lot of people don't know the ICC only prosecutes the leaders of African nations.
Yep.
I do.
Oh, yeah. Even the ones that take the bait and are propped up by us, they're dumbasses, which you should never, if you're a leader, you're thinking about, buying into America and we're going to give you the world. Nah, don't do it, bro. We setting you up for failure, because we're going to then throw you to the ICC as a scapegoat. That's exactly what we're going to do. We did it to the Chadian leader right after we got rid of Gaddafi finally. All of a sudden, well, that leader in Chad, he's problematic. We got to get rid of him so he doesn't fucking talk about everything that we did. That's exactly what happened. So
we need those shipping lines.
Exactly. So, Danny, we agree on a lot, and I appreciate this conversation. And for everybody else out there, this is how you're supposed to have discourse and dialogue when you're trying to, like I said, I'm not saying that what Danny said isn't true or not factual or like that she shouldn't be concerned, because she absolutely should be concerned, because as much as I like Tulsi as a candidate, I'm always going to be concerned because she's a politician at the end of the day. And if she's president, one signature could change the futures and the lives of everybody in the world, not just this country. So you should always be concerned. But when you're having these,
it might just be as simple as that the identity issue on which Tulsi is most frequently incorrect is me.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are really disappointed with Bernie's answers on reparations.
Oh yeah.
A long time. And so a lot of voters just left him forever over that. And that is what it is. You're accountable for what you do when you're a politician.
Yeah,
and so
that's true.
Tulsi Gabbard ain't never going to get me back.
Yeah,
because
and that's
if I think somebody has fundamental biases against me as a human being, even if they've learned, that's great. I still don't think you should be the president of the United States of America. Now, that's personal. That's not what I came to talk about today. That's why you're never going to convince me to vote for Tulsi. But that's the kind of thing that we should be able to have good faith conversations easy about.
Yeah.
The votes, the issues, the structural things that they do. That's where we've got to be like we were today, Niko, where we are just unbridled in our critique. Unafraid to point out a voting record and say, this was wrong, because it was the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
It was a bad right-wing thing.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you having me on to have this conversation.
It's no problem at all. It's no problem at all. I'm going to let you go. And for everybody else, thank you so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mi Casa Es Su Casa. And always remember, more than everything else, people, find your balance. Peace.